All right, so he runs a thriving website called thegorkabriefing.com. It's probably one of the go-to websites that you need to put on your bookmarks to keep up with what he produces. There's a tremendous amount of great information. He's the author of the currently sold out, if you're not getting it tonight, wait until it comes back to Amazon, Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War. Or as Jennifer likes to say it,
sometimes the wannabe war.
The Wineable War.
The Wineable War.
Because she loves wine.
I do.
So ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Sebastian Gorka.
So it's funny. This is my first book. Defeating Jihad is my first book. And I eat, breathe, and sleep national security. I mean, that's all I care about, really. My family, the Republic, and national security. So when I got the contract and I finally was forced to write the book, they gave me a 30-day deadline to write it, I was going to dive in and just write about jihadis and write about the threat. And my wife, who's an American who was born here, said, "Are you crazy? You can't do that." Americans love a good story. And you have to connect with your audience first. You can give them information, you can explain things, you can help them out, give them a plan to win, but you've got to connect. So she said, "Why don't you start with your family background?" And that was the last thing I was going to do. I mean, I grew up in the UK, right? Stiff upper lip, all that stuff. We don't talk about that. But she was right, because you know what? So the book's now sold out, and whenever I meet somebody who's read it, all they want to talk about is the first chapter, about my family. I mean, they say, "Wow, what a story, your dad." I mean, I'm trying to write about jihad, and all they want to talk about is my dad.
It was a great story.
Thank you. I mean, my wife was right. So what can I say? How did it affect me? It affected me hugely. So if you haven't read the book, it is about the threat to America and how to defeat the jihadis. But it starts with how 9/11 affected me. And it affected me, I think, differently from how it affected most Americans who had the blessings of God to actually be born here in America. Because my parents weren't American. My parents were on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain during the Cold War at the beginning. And my father, as a teenager, saw his country being stolen by the communists. He grew up in Hungary. And after World War II, he saw the communist menace just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally, he said, "This is enough." So as an 18-year-old young man at university, he said, "I'm going to do something about this." So he created a secret Christian group of his fellow students who are patriots. And he said, "We're going to spy on the communists. We're going to spy on the Soviets that are taking over our country. And we're going to collect information about where they're moving the tanks, how they're taking control of the economy, and we're going to send it out to the West. And maybe the West can help us." And sure enough, they created this little circle of patriotic intelligence gatherers. And eventually they found a way to send that information out to the UK. So these secret reports, believe it or not, written with invisible ink, okay, this is in 1950, so it's really invisible ink, were making their way through a courier, through Vienna, all the way to MI6 in the UK. The bad news was that the reports eventually would land on the desk of a man called Kim Philby. Kim Philby is one of the 5 most successful communist spies and infiltrators of the Cold War. With the Cambridge Apostles, he betrayed hundreds of people during the Cold War inside the British intelligence establishment. As a result, my father was also betrayed by Kim Philby. He was arrested at the age of 20. He was almost executed, but instead he was given a life sentence, and he was locked away in a communist prison. Eventually, he managed to escape. He was liberated by the Hungarian revolutionaries of 1956, and he got out to the West with his future wife and my mother. As a result of that background, growing up in England, it was made patently clear to me, as soon as I could understand, that liberty is as fragile as it is precious. And the sentence from President Reagan is so true and always will be true, that the loss of liberty is always but one generation away. So I understood what totalitarianism means and how there'll always be somebody who wants to take away your freedom and your liberty. So when I watched on that, do you remember how beautiful that Tuesday morning was, 9/11? Not a cloud in the sky, beautiful blue sky in New York and D.C. When I watched those two planes fly into the World Trade Center, I reacted a little bit differently. Because to me, I recognized that the totalitarians are back. They're not communists, they're not even fascists, but the jihadis, like the man who slaughtered 49 Americans just a few days ago in Orlando, they are totalitarians. Either you do what they say, either you submit to them and become their slave, or they will kill you. So, a long answer to a short question, but my family background was intrinsic to how I understand the threat to America today and what 9/11 means to the future of America.
All right, just kind of staying with that theme of communism, we say we won the Cold War, and yet it seems now communism hasn't disappeared. It actually recalibrated, it morphed, and it's embedded itself into American institutions like academia. It now teaches and expands its doctrine. And as some have documented, it actually is connected now to some members of Congress. You know, they have their roots in this. Isn't that every bit as much a threat to America's long-term existence as the frontal assault we say we defeated in the Cold War? And if it is, how do we defeat this latest incarnation of communism?
Wow, do you want the 8-hour answer? So yes, you can destroy the Republic in many different ways. And my reading of recent American history is the following. In the late 1960s, across Europe and in America, there was a movement. It was a socialist Marxist movement. On the streets of Paris in 1968, if you recall, there was this idea that we could, the kids could build the barricades and we're going to create a Marxist paradise. Well, that happened here as well. It happened in the SDS during the Vietnam War, and it happened with people like Bernardine Dawn and Bill Ayers. But what happened to it? They failed. In America, the radicals who wanted to use force to create a revolution, to turn America into a socialist state, they lost, and they lost badly. But they were very smart, because when they lost, they didn't surrender. They just changed their tactics. Instead of a frontal physical assault, instead of creating the barricades and a revolution, they decided to go with what Hitler and Lenin understood, who said, "Give me their children, and I will capture their nation." So the people who were the physical radicals on the barricades, throwing the Molotov cocktails, became the school teachers, the university college professors, and as a result, they have changed the nature of the youth in America. And I think that's why you see what you see with Bernie Sanders. I mean, children who have no understanding of what it means to live in a socialist country and how it takes away the freedom of the individual. So yeah, there is this internal struggle we have, that we've ceded the educational territory to people who do not love this nation, who do not love the principles of the founding. And I think your second half was your question was, what do we do about it?
Right. I mean, it's now embedded. Right. It's not so obvious. In the Cold War, it was nation versus nation. Right. Here, it's like embedded, much like we're going to get into the Muslim Brotherhood. But how do we deal with that? I mean, we have the First Amendment. People can believe what they want to believe, but yet this is an ideology that we literally fought in the Cold War. We still need to fight it. I mean, it still is very much an enemy to, the Constitution and the thing, liberty.
Absolutely. And I think the way we fight it, there's lots of ways to fight it. Why is the whole homeschool movement so popular? I think the homeschool movement is a direct response to the losing the educational territory to the radicals and to the left. But I think the answer is really, look in the mirror if you want to solve the problem. If you want to solve the problem, then are you a member of your local school district council? Do you go to the meetings? Do you allow them to get away with the kinds of things they're publishing in textbooks today? Because if you do, then don't be surprised if it gets worse and worse. So I think everybody that has a responsibility to be active. It's very easy to criticize, to complain, but again, many nations have this saying, every nation deserves the government it elects, right? Whether that's at a school board, county, or whether it's a nation. So the answer is us.
That's right. Over several administrations, there has been a line drawn between Islam and radical Islam. You said a counter-messaging campaign similar to that of the Cold War. In that war, communism was communism. There was no radical communist versus good communist. So how do we accomplish this, given this distinction between Islam and radical Islam?
Well, the first thing is we have to take politics out of the threat assessment. I have the honor to work with our armed forces, our FBI, the Marines. There is a political matrix that has been forced upon our men and women in uniform, which is quite horrific. And this is open source. You can read this. The White House 6 years ago sent a memo from the National Security Council to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, so the most senior military officer in the United States, and also to the Attorney General, who is the most senior law enforcement officer of the United States. And what did it say? The memo said, all counterterrorism training in the federal government must be scrubbed. Any mention of religion, especially Islam, must be deleted. And words such as jihad must never be used again in the training of our military and our law enforcement. Now, that's what we've been living. And that's why you have what you had after Orlando. The press conference the president gave yesterday, yes? I mean, think about it. He was angry that somebody would suggest that what you call the enemy matters. He was angry. He said, what difference would it make? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, it's a pretty good impression,
right,
actually.
Right. You know what difference it makes? It makes a huge difference. What if you're sick and you go to the doctor and you've got tuberculosis, and the doctor says, I'm going to call that the common cold. Take 2 aspirins and go home and hydrate. What you call something matters. You cannot solve a problem unless you identify it. So, Mr. President, let me tell you, it matters a lot what we call the threat. And the idea that the word radical Islam is verboten, is not permitted, that's like saying in 1944, as we're about to storm the beaches, don't say the word Nazi because you could offend a German. Right?
Kind of keeping on this theme, in the book, you point out similarities between communism and the jihad. What are the most important similarities? And what can we learn from defeating communism that we can now apply to today's fight against the jihad?
Great. So, as I said previously, so the biggest similarity is the idea that it's totalitarian. Yeah, it's about, it's absolute. Either we win or they win. There's no in between. So the big similarity is you cannot negotiate with this enemy. Just forget about it. Yeah, think about what could you have negotiated about with Hitler. Yeah? Which oven he's going to put you in or what caliber of gun he's going to shoot you with. Yeah? There is no negotiation. So that's a similarity. Biggest difference is the fact that it isn't a locatable nation state. There's no street address for the enemy because they're where? They're in Raqqa, Dabiq, Mosul, Baghdad, Orlando, San Bernardino, Boston, Chattanooga. So this is a truly globally dispersed conspiracy. While the Islamic State holds territory in the Middle East, they have their agents of influence everywhere and also their jihadis. So that's a big difference that we have to deal with. What are the lessons learned? This is really why I wrote the book, because I grew up shaped by the Cold War. and by my parents' experience. And it dawned on me, analyzing the Cold War, America was essential to that victory. I mean, let's just step back for a second. Isn't it interesting that it took America stepping up to the plate to defeat the Nazis and the communists? Isn't that interesting? Without us, right? Without us, Europe would be talking German today, yeah? Or maybe Russian. It took us getting in there to win that war for other people, yeah? And you know what? It's going to take us again. Why? Because the totalitarians are back. So the lesson for me is the following. We won the Cold War on November the 9th, 1989. Do you remember those pictures from Berlin, yeah? As they started, the people who were captives started to dismember, to take apart the walls that were keeping them in. But can somebody recall, it's not a trick question, okay? November 9th, 1989, Checkpoint Charlie, yeah, Brandenburg Gate. How many shots were fired across that wall on November the 9th? None. Zero. Not one gun was fired. Not an AK-47 by them, not an M16 by us. But we won. So how did we win if we didn't shoot anybody, if we didn't drop any bombs? We won because President Reagan destroyed their ideology. 2 years before the wall fell, he went to the Brandenburg Gate. Do you remember? Yep. And he stood there in front of the Berlin Wall, and he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. A sentence, by the way, just a little sidebar, that the State Department tried to remove from his speech 6 times. They said, this is inflammatory, don't say it. You can see the original copy of the speech, I think, in the Reagan Library. They'd taken it out 6 times, so what was the Gipper forced to do? In the beast, in the limo, to the site, he had to manually write the sentence back into the speech with his pen, right? Isn't that interesting, right? The machine was working against him, right? So, and what did he do with that one sentence? It's genius. He said, tear down this wall. But he wasn't talking about a wall. Yeah, he was saying to everybody who's a captive behind that wall, do you know why your masters built a wall? It's not to protect you from me. It's to keep you in, to deny you your liberty. That's what we have to understand now. This victory against the jihadists will not be in the final analysis a physical one. It's not going to be measured in tonnage of bombs dropped or body bags. Yes, we tried that during the Vietnam War. Body bags is not a good metric of victory, okay? Don't get me wrong, okay? I served in a CT, a counterterrorism reserve unit in the UK. I am down with killing terrorists. I have no objection to that. But it's not the measure of ultimate victory. Why? Because you can kill one jihadi with a UAV strike. You can send in a special forces team to take out one guy. But what's going to happen if the next day 15 jihadis volunteer to replace him? Right? So it's a vicious, endless circle. So how do we win? We have to delegitimize the message of holy war, of jihad, just like President Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, John Paul II did with communism. That's how we're going to win.
I think before we move on, definition time, just for everybody that's we want to clear everything up if we're just kind of getting started in this subject matter. So to fully comprehend, I think, the issues that we have to understand, we need to know the vocabulary. What is jihad? What is Islam? And is it more than just a religion?
The simple questions.
In 30 seconds.
Yeah, okay.
Go.
All right. So jihad. Jihad, what is jihad? Buy the book. No, sorry.
Good answer.
Jihad, if you read the Quran, is a couple of different things. It can be used as a kind of metaphor for inner striving or struggle to resist temptation. Or it can be used to describe martial war against the infidel. And guess which one is more popular? Okay? You can just count them, read the Quran and count it. I always say to Americans, after 9/11, every American should have a Quran. Why? Because so much rubbish is spun about Islam. So don't take my word for it. Don't take some guy on MSNBC's word for it. Why don't check it out yourself? Go to the primary source and read it. Buy a Quran and count how many times the word jihad is used and in which context. And you will see, by factors, it is far more often used to describe war against the kufr, the infidel, in the interests of what? Expanding the Islamic State, building the caliphate, expressing Allah's sovereignty on this earth. So jihad has evolved over the years. Today it has returned to its original usage, or most popular usage, which is to serve God in capturing territory to expand the empire of Islam. Second question?
Before you move on,
No, hang on, you had a second half.
The second half was, is
Islam.
Islam,
Islam.
just a religion, or is it something more?
But can I get some clarification on that?
Yeah.
I saw an ad on the side of a bus in San Francisco that said, my jihad is going to the gym every day so that I can get my body in better shape. So I'm confused. Where did that ad come from?
I think that's a leading question. Where did that ad come from? It came from people who want you to not know the truth about the threat to America. It comes from organizations that understand you can win a war without killing the infidel. You can change the way they think. You can subvert. You can undermine the institutions of democracy. So, the granddaddy of all that we're talking about, we can talk about ISIS for the rest of the evening. We can talk about Al-Qaeda and the connections between ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But the granddaddy of them all is the Muslim Brotherhood. I need everybody to please understand this, even if you don't buy the book. The Muslim Brotherhood is not what some people would have you believe, a bunch of frustrated Jeffersonian Democrats. Okay? The Muslim Brotherhood was created explicitly 4 years after the empire was dissolved, after World War I, with one express mission: to reestablish the empire of Islam for the glory of God. Anybody else tells you any different, they're either an idiot or part of the Brotherhood. Those are your two options, yes? They tell you that they're good guys. They either have no idea what they're talking about or they're part of the problem. So who wrote that poster? The people who are part of the problem.
So back to this. What is Islam, and is it more than a religion?
Okay, so what is Islam, and is it more than a religion? Please don't take this as a cop-out, but I'm very sincere about this, because since moving to America, since becoming an American citizen, I spent 6 years in the Department of Defense, and I worked very, very closely with our Muslim allies, and I mean really closely, especially our Jordanian brothers. And let me be explicit here. Today, in the 21st century, there is no monolithic answer to what Islam is. Because you can go, to a disco in Jordan with your girlfriend in a miniskirt, have some beer afterwards, and that's a very different Islam from if you land in Riyadh, okay? So the difference between Saudi Arabia and Jordan, or Indonesia and Pakistan, is monumental. It is enormous, okay? Nevertheless, there is a version of Islam that is today in the ascendancy. And it's the version that is deadly to us and deadly to our Muslim allies. Remember, what was the religion of the fighter pilot in the cage? Islam. Right. He wasn't even Shia. ISIS hate the Shia. He was a Sunni from Jordan like them, but they burnt him alive. So ISIS represents a very atavistic 7th century puritanical version of Islam, which is actually supported by aspects of the Quran. The Quran, if you read it, the second half is very, very violent. It's when Muhammad comes back from Medina and he's a righteous, powerful warrior killing all the infidels in front of him. But not everybody who calls himself a Muslim agrees with that. And we have Muslims in the armed forces. I've trained Muslim FBI agents. So the question is not what is Islam, because you can't answer that question. The question is which version is winning. And right now, from the streets of Brussels to the streets of Orlando, the wrong version is winning.
All right. Digging deeper into this, is there another terrorist or existential threat to America that compares to jihad that we need to be concerned about, or is this the major concern based on your work? And part B to that is, Jennifer, could you pass me a bottle of water?
No.
Let me answer that in two parts. The first one is a recent experience I had that illustrates how bad things are inside our government. About 2 months ago, I went out out Midwest to a state that will remain nameless. And I was asked to brief about 300 local law enforcement officers. And I had the pleasure of briefing them for 8 hours, okay? You think we're having fun tonight. I had these guys for 8 hours. And I gave them soup to nuts on what the bad guys believe. So Jihad 101, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, for 8 hours. At the end of the day, a very pretty young girl walked up to me and said, Dr. Gorka, that was, impressive. You're clearly very clever. But I have to disagree with, I think, everything you said. Because you need to understand that the major and primary threat to all these law enforcement officers is white supremacist militias. She then gave me her business card, and it was from the Department of Homeland Security. I proceeded to ask the woman, really, that's fascinating. Could you give me an example of a white supremacist terrorist attack on the level of, I don't know, San Bernardino or 9/11? She paused, and then eventually said, Timothy McVeigh. What about one that's less than 21 years ago? Right? So to answer your first part of your question, no. The terrorist threat to America is from what I call the global jihadi movement. Okay? How does this compare to other threats to America? This is the biggie. Okay? I'm sorry, this is the biggie. Russia is a problem, but Vladimir Putin is nothing but a thug. He's a bully, okay? Bullies, if you smack them on the nose hard enough, they behave. What we haven't done is smack him on the nose. He's not an existential threat to America. He's a spoiler. He's a bully and a spoiler. China, likewise. I know the Navy and the Air Force would love to have dogfights with Chinese fighter pilots over the South China Sea. I know they're excited about going to war with China, but sorry guys, not happening, okay? China has one second-hand diesel-powered aircraft carrier. We have 12 nuclear ones, okay? Not happening. They're stealing our lunch, okay, in the cyber domain, stealing our industrial secrets, but they're not going to go to war with us because we would crush them. What else is there? North Korea. North Korea is an issue, but not an existential one. The primary threat to America is jihad of both varieties. Sunnis, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS, and maybe even more dangerous, the Shia version. Why? Because this administration has just released $150 billion to the mullahs in Iran. And the mullahs in Iran are likewise not frustrated Jeffersonian Democrats. They believe in theocracy, in the empire of Islam, but their Shia version, right? So right now we have a competition between two versions of the caliphate, and one of them is a threshold nuclear power. We need to let that sink in for a second. A threshold nuclear power, amongst which many of its leaders believe the apocalypse would be a good thing. Not a good combination. Nuclear weapons and belief in Armageddon, bad recipe.
All right, I'm going to sneak in a question here just to get a question from the audience. If you guys filled some of these out, we are taking these now. Speaking of the Obama administration and the stellar deal-making, the Obama administration's policies are aiding Islamic Jihad. What is your best assessment as to why this is being done?
This is perhaps the question I get the most. Explain to us what happened in the last 7.5 years. Two big things, two really big things. First one is a kind of worldview issue. Washington is full of politicians and bureaucrats, and unfortunately this isn't just a left-wing thing, okay? This is on the right as well. It's full of people in nice, Italian suits who see themselves as very sophisticated men of the world, very modern, or in fact postmodern or secular. And these individuals have a very peculiar attitude to religion or faith. They may go to church on Sunday, they may go to the temple, but for them religion is a social club. It is a networking tool for an hour a week and some coffee and donuts afterwards. Okay? For them, religion isn't something that's about objective truth or eternal life. It's about networking. Now, if that is what you think about religion, you will never understand the threat to America. You just will not get it. And I realized very soon after working in the Defense Department, I don't care what your religion is. I don't care if you're a Zoroastrian. I don't care if you're a Buddhist, a Taoist. But if you don't have some kind of faith, and I mean real faith, yeah, you will not understand the jihadists. It's just impossible, right? Impossible. Think about it. How would you even understand the logic of a suicide bomber? You won't understand it. The idea that I'm going to blow myself up, but I'm going to win, yeah, you will not compute. So number one, our politicians don't get it because they don't have individual faith. Secondly is a more technical issue, and it's to do with how they explain where the terrorists come from. Very early on in the first Obama administration, a theory was sold to the White House by a member of the intelligence community that all terrorism is the result of poverty and lack of education. No, seriously, they actually believe this, okay? That because your dad didn't hug you when you were a kid and you didn't get to go to grad school, well, clearly you're going to just end up decapitating people, right? Right? So we have that analysis of where it comes from, and if you think that's where jihad comes from, then what is your answer going to be? It's not going to be about ideology. It's not going to be about destroying them. It's going to be about what Maria Harf, the deputy press spokeswoman for the Department of State, said on national television. America will be safe and there will be no more 9/11s if we have jobs for jihadis. And she wasn't joking. So those two things together pretty much explains why we are where we are today.
Well, that kind of takes this question that was next, so I'm going to skip forward. Your description of the Islamic State compared to Al-Qaeda makes Al-Qaeda almost seem tribal in comparison. AQ pulled off 9/11 with $500,000 compared to the finances of the Islamic State. Your research shows the Islamic State with a GDP of $500 million and a storehouse of wealth acquired from bank raids. They seem technologically superior in many ways. Is there an Islamic State 9/11 in the making, or is their strategy decidedly different?
Okay, great question. It is decidedly different. So ISIS has blown Al-Qaeda out of the water in terms of branding. Nobody talks about Al-Qaeda anymore, which is really bad because they're out there, okay? And they're going to have to prove their relevance, yes? So now we have the Pepsi versus Coca-Cola thing going on. Not good, not good, okay? But ISIS is a different strategy, and the different strategy is based on one thing. The real name for ISIS, the real name, okay, is not what the president calls it or anybody else. It is the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham. Now, Al-Sham is a special word in Arabic that is equivalent, if you think of Christianity, to Megiddo. Okay? If you know your eschatology, if you read St. John's book of Revelation, you would know that end times for Christians will happen with tribulation, mighty conflict, the Antichrist, the second coming, but most specifically with a mighty battle on the plains of Megiddo. Yes, this is a town in northern Israel. It's where we get the English word Armageddon. Well, Islam has its own eschatology, its own apocalyptic vision. And guess what Al-Sham is? Al-Sham is the Megiddo for Muslims. Al-Sham is the territory that Muslims are taught is the location of the last jihad, the last one before Judgment Day. What is that territory? Syria, and Iraq. And ISIS didn't just call themselves the Islamic State of the apocalyptic territory. What did it do? It captured it. Wow. So every time they tweet out, every time they put something on Facebook, we are the Islamic State of Al-Sham, what does that 17-year-old kid in his mom's basement, or that Pakistani immigrant, or that son of Afghan parents living in Orlando, in Florida, what message do they get? Have you ever thought of becoming a jihadi? Do you want to save your soul and guarantee salvation for you and your loved ones? Well, young man, the clocks are ticking, because look at where we are. We have initiated the last jihad. There will be no more other opportunities for you to save your soul, so come on down. There is no other way to explain 86,000 foreign fighter jihadis recruited by ISIS in less than 4 years. So ISIS is much better at social media and much better at leveraging religion, especially this apocalyptic one, and in ways that Al-Qaeda never even dreamt of.
I thought they were the JV team and they were contained.
Right.
Sorry.
Breaking
Yeah,
news, right? All right, I'm going back to my wordsmith question for you. The terms self-radicalized and lone wolf are used over and over and over again by the media. What do they mean? And are they true?
They are words deliberately designed to make Americans stupid. They are words with a meaning and a purpose to make you, and I borrowed this from a good friend of mine, Tom Jocelyn, they are words designed to make you disconnect the dots. That's the importance of these words. Homegrown, self-radicalized, lone wolf, they are all absolutely fallacious. They are false. They are wrong. The idea that somebody is just a good old boy on Monday and then on Tuesday decides to murder 49 people, yeah, and is disconnected from anything else is crazy. It's absurd. There is a connection between 9/11, Fort Hood, Chattanooga, San Bernardino, Orlando, the Boston bombers. There is a connective tissue. There's nothing lone about it. The connective tissue is the ideology of jihad. All of these individuals consumed jihadi ideology and made a conscious decision to go down the road of holy war. And that's why, if I may, that's why the first speech the president gave after the Orlando massacre was really not only disappointing, it was unconscionable. Because on at least 4 occasions, he tried to make this into a hate crime. He tried to turn this into some one-off crazy guy, which actually diminished the reality of what had occurred. Those people weren't killed because they were homosexuals or friends of homosexuals. They were killed because they're Americans and because they're infidels and because the ideology of jihad says they must be killed. So we have a narrative that is being peddled by Washington, but it is not the reality of who the threat is.
So we have a question from the audience that kind of dovetails very nicely into that. How do we, they use the word homegrown in this, how do we stop the homegrown ISIS members? We've just dispelled that rumor, but how do we stop them?
Two huge things. So it's not really going to be creating more giant metadata NSA storage facilities in the desert of Arizona, okay? The idea that technology will save us, no. This is a very human threat. So 2 things. Number one, the nodes of jihadism are the key ideologues on the internet. Just a few dozen people here and there that are the mouthpiece of jihadi ideology. We have to find them and shut them down. It's not the operational commanders, it's the people that are propagating the propaganda. They are the real center of gravity. Second thing is we have to take a leaf out of probably one of the most effective counterterrorism organizations the world has ever seen, which is the NYPD. The NYPD, after 9/11, felt betrayed by federal government. They felt that the CIA, the FBI, had just dropped the ball, and that's why we had 9/11. So what did they do? They said, we're not going to trust Uncle Sam anymore. We're not going to wait for Washington to save us. We're going to look after the Big Apple ourselves. So what did they do? On September the 10th, 2001, the NYPD had 2 counterterrorism analysts. 2. Today, the NYPD is one of the world-class best counterterrorism organizations ever. And what is so good about them? Primarily what we call human intelligence, undercover assets, going into the communities with humans who identify the radical recruiters, the potential jihadis, who surveil the places where they hang out. And I'm sorry, where do radical people hang out? With the radical imams in the radical mosques. If you want to find the members of the Cosa Nostra or the mafia, go to the Italian restaurants. Don't look for them in the Mexican restaurants. It's not a good idea. So yeah, there are ways to do this, and the NYPD has really broken the mold.
Since you brought up the NYPD, they had a document, a PDF file, kind of outlining some of their results, and they were under pressure to take it down.
They did.
And they had to take it down. Now, if anybody wants it, I happen to capture it so we can distribute it. Yeah. So they did take it down. Who pressured them to take it down?
The new mayor of New York, Blasio.
All right.
All right, another question from the audience. Can Islam be reformed to undercut the extremism, violence, or is the evil root so intrinsic to Islam that we must reject the Islamic religion in total?
Okay, so going back to the idea that there's no one version of Islam, ask yourself the question, when has a Muslim country functioned in ways that are concordant with our standards and been a good ally to us and functioned? There are 2 models, ladies and gentlemen. There are 2 models. The first one is the Republic of Turkey, before a person called Erdogan arrived. Yes? So Turkey under Atatürk, the founder of the modern Turkish state. And secondly, one I've mentioned several times before, which is Jordan. I've trained most of the leading officers in Jordan today. I tell you what, I'd stand in a trench with any of them. I would bet my life on any of the Jordanians. They are hard, their special forces are good, and they are on the front line of this war, and they want to crush ISIS. So why Jordan and why Turkey? 2 different models. Turkey worked because why? Because when he became president, Atatürk said, you can all be Muslims, that's fine, I don't care, but I'm going to take politics and Islam and I'm going to separate them. Like the founding fathers in America, separation of church and state. He said, you can go to the mosque on Friday, but Islam can have nothing to do with running the country. He forcibly separated religion and politics. Now that legacy has been destroyed by this new kind of Muslim Brotherhood head of state there, but if you can separate politics and religion, you've got a chance. The second one is Jordan. Now, Jordan, very interesting. Why? Does anybody know why is Jordan called the Hashemite kingdom? Hashemite refers to the fact that the royal family is descended from the Prophet Muhammad, which gives them a certain cred. When the king says something, you better do it. And on top of that, where does the royal family go to school? Here and England. The king's sister was one of my students. The king went to Sandhurst. So these are people who are eminently familiar with our values, our culture. They've gone to our schools. Not only that, somebody wants to argue with them, they can always pull out the Hashemite card. Now, you can't replicate and cookie cutter the Hashemite thing unless you give the whole Middle East to Jordan, and there might be some people who have issues with that. So the Jordan model is very specific and localized. So the only real answer is separation, not of church and state, but separation of mosque and state. That is a model, and that's exactly, and I can tell you because I've met him and I've spoken to him for hours, that's exactly what President Sisi of Egypt is trying to do. He's a very devout Muslim, but he wants to have a country that is allied to us and in which the Muslim Brotherhood isn't stealing that nation from under his own feet.
This is a great lead into the next question. It seems like Saudi Arabia has been able to largely dodge the jihad. Does this implicate them in the execution of the jihad in any way?
Wow. So this is a whole chapter in the book. It's called Annus Mirabilis, Annus Horribilis, 1979. If you want to understand the real threat to America, 1979 is, 1979 is it. Okay? 3 reasons. Number 1, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Why is that important? Because that's when they start to recruit jihadis from around the world. They recruit them to fight the Russians in Afghanistan, but later those organizations will morph into what? Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was born during the Afghan war with the Soviets in the 1980s. Second, we have the Iranian Revolution. Iranian Revolution is crucial because the Persians, the Shiites, proved what? They proved that we can do a theocracy. We can reject the Western model. We don't have to have separation of mosque and state. We're going to reintegrate it. We're going to have theocracy, and the mullahs, the priests, are going to run our nation. Yeah? So the Iranian Revolution is a kind of spur to Sunnis as well to say, look, we can do it. You're a bunch of failures. But the third thing is the most important of all, and it goes to your question, and it's an event that most Americans have no idea actually happened. So whilst the Russians are, getting embroiled in their little Vietnam in Afghanistan, whilst Ben Affleck is rescuing our hostages in Tehran, there's a much more important event. 300 jihadis, armed with automatic weapons, in 1979 captured the holiest building in Islam. They captured the Grand Mosque of Mecca. Now, this is like a bunch of, do you remember Waco, Texas? You remember David Koresh? So this is like a crazy guy who says he's a Christian capturing St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. This is a big deal. And these jihadis didn't want to kill us infidels. They wanted to kill other Muslims because they weren't Muslim enough. Right? And for 13 days, they captured the holiest building in Islam. Now, why does this matter? They were all killed, almost all of them. Because that operation had been blessed by some Muslim clerics, holy men, who had said to the jihadis, oh yeah, we've lost our way. Islam is not pure anymore. We need a war to cleanse us. You need to kill all the bad Muslims. Now, the king of Saudi Arabia found this out. And he identified these clerics, and he invited them to the palace for a little chat. Yeah. And he said to them, I know who you are, and I know you blessed this war against me. Let me make you a deal. If you guarantee that my family, the House of Saud, Saudi Arabia, will never ever suffer a jihadi attack again, you, your sons, your grandsons will have jobs for life. You will become the court clerics, the priests to the king. And if you guarantee that there will never be jihad inside Saudi Arabia, I will finance the export of jihadi ideology outside of Saudi Arabia. This is all detailed in a wonderful book by the Wall Street Journal author Trofimov called The Siege of Mecca. So for 20 years, what was the Saudi regime doing? For the price of having peace at home, they were funding the export of jihad across the globe just to make sure everything was okay at home. Now, what happened? The deal didn't last. Why? Because after 9/11, Al-Qaeda got a bit big for their boots. And in 2004 to 2005, they actually sent their agents into Saudi Arabia to start targeting the king, targeting the princes, and killing Saudi security agents. As a result, they broke the deal. So now Saudi Arabia's a little bit, how shall I say it, worried. Yeah? Because the people they thought they could trust have now turned on them, and now they have to decide what they're going to do next. So Saudi Arabia has been a little bit half pregnant for the last 30 years. Now they have to decide what they're going to do.
Another question?
I never knew any of that. That was fascinating.
He hasn't read my book.
I never knew any of that before I had to read your book to ask the question.
Don't protest. All right, here we go. Next question from the audience. The influence of Wahhabism on American mosques and radicalization of young men. The question, or I guess the statement is to discuss that.
Okay, so Wahhabism is the kind of Islam that Saudi Arabia follows. So there's a guy called Wahhab and a guy called Saud that founded the modern kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Wahhabism is a very puritanical, fundamentalist version of Islam. That's why you have the beheadings, the hands chopping off. That's Wahhabist Islam. So what is the influence here in America? Saudi Arabia spends a lot of money in America, and they're not building shopping malls, okay? So what do they spend money on? Mosques. And training of imams. I don't want to dive into any contentious conspiracy theory areas, but there are some very solid estimates that more than 60% of the mosques in America receive funding from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That's very different from getting funding from the Kingdom of Jordan. Very, very different. And as we have seen, the role of imams in radicalization is key. Why? In Islam, a Quran is only a Quran if it is in Arabic. If you don't speak Arabic, then who's going to tell you how to interpret the Quran? Your imam. The imam has a very different role in Islam. It's not like Christianity. They are a quality control choke point for understanding the religion. And we have seen time and time and again. Let me add one thing. It's very interesting. Just, Andy McCarthy. Andy McCarthy was the prosecutor that put the blind sheikh away. Andy McCarthy just wrote an article you should check out that was published yesterday. Andy McCarthy has identified that the blind sheikh's bodyguard, Marcus Robertson, who converted to Islam and changed his name to an Arabic name, ran the mosque that the Orlando shooter went to.
So this guy was already on the FBI. I mean, he was a known person. He'd been in prison for money laundering, to fund jihads. This guy was known.
So the likelihood that there is more to Orlando than a guy who was suppressing his homoerotic fantasies, this could be something much, much deeper if there's a connection to the blind sheikh through the imam who ran the mosque where the killer went to. So, stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned.
All right. Your book deals mostly with violent jihad, but what about the cultural jihad being waged by the Muslim Brotherhood proxies in Western civilization in America that softens us? I tell people we're only 3 city council votes away from mosques broadcasting the call to prayer. Aren't these just different fronts in the same epic war? And then there's a part B. Why did Eric Holder seal the Holy Land evidence? And should the evidence from the Holy Land Foundation trial be opened and, if warranted, used to indict the unindicted co-conspirators?
Yes. I think it's 73 boxes. 73 boxes of evidence cannot be accessed by the U.S. taxpayer in America's largest ever threat financing trial. The biggest terrorist financing trial, $12 million raised here in America to go and fund Hamas.
But yet the attorneys to do the appeal for the 5 guys that were imprisoned as a result of the trial were able to get in to evaluate it.
Right.
So this Muslim Brotherhood sort of cultural jihad in America, this is just a different front in the same war. How do we deal with that? Or did we already cover that earlier?
No, it's really hugely important because there's more than one way to destroy a civilization, yes? You can kill everybody, and that's pretty intensive. You've got to have a lot of soldiers, a lot of weapons. What's the other way? You subvert it. Yeah, you subvert a culture. You destroy it from the inside. I think the phrase from the Holy Land Foundation memorandum, the explanatory memorandum is, you destroy the wretched house of the West with their own hand from the inside. That's smart. I mean, think about it. I mean, why did we do counterintelligence during the Cold War? Because it's one thing to prepare for World War III, the kinetic, the nuclear war. But what if they just put people in the right places to subvert us, to influence our policy, yeah? Whether it's al-Jihis or whether it's other people, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So yes, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Al-Qaeda, the ISISes of the world are shocking because it's beheading, it's immolation, it's mass murder. But the Muslim Brotherhood is very smart at getting what it wishes to get without killing anybody. Let me give you a couple of examples. There are nations in Europe where, for political reasons, the local governments have decided to provide full state federal benefits to all 4 wives of a Muslim citizen. In all of those nations, polygamy is constitutionally illegal. It is just absolutely unconstitutional. But for reasons of political correctness, making everybody happy, multiculturalism, the decision is taken. You've got 4 wives, you get 4 times as much benefit. Now, what does that do to the constitutional order of that nation? Nobody got shot, nothing blew up, but you've taken a nice big chunk out of that civilization's values. So, absolutely right. This is the more insidious and potentially more dangerous aspect of the war against the jihadis.
And just a clarification, when we talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, that manifests itself within the United States in organizations. One of the first was the Muslim Student Association, all the way up to the civil rights organizations like CARE, even organizations that clarify Muslim law, like the fiqh councils here. All of these are interconnected, and their leadership just kind of a revolving door. They move their leadership around. As soon as we get smart to one, they move them or bring in new people.
Look, I think you can tell Don's a bit of an expert on this, okay? Mm-hmm. But let me just mention one thing. If you're not familiar and you don't follow his work, so the Holy Land Foundation trial is the key to it all. Because as a result of that investigation, we found the archives, the secret archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, and they were entered into federal court as evidence. This isn't, somebody's blog somewhere. This is federal evidence in a Texas court in the biggest terrorist financing trial in U.S. history. And one of the documents that they submitted was a list of the Muslim Brotherhood's front organizations and allies. That's what it's called. The Muslim Brotherhood says, our organizations and the organizations of our allies. And on that list is the Council of American Islamic Relations, organizations that you've all heard of, organizations that have been giving advice and training to U.S. government after 9/11. But the thing about these organizations is that the federal court decided that they are all unindicted co-conspirators, which means they are accomplices to the Muslim Brotherhood Hamas organization whose leaders were put in prison.
185 years.
Right.
All right, we just have a few more minutes here with Dr. Gorka. And so I know we've talked on a few points of what you would do, the plan that you lay out in your book. But go over the top 5 points, things that the country can do now, that the next president should do, and also comment if there is a political candidate that you think could be more equipped than the other to take over in November.
All right, so the things that need to be done. I've mentioned 3 of them already. Number 1, politics out of the threat assessment. Talk truthfully about who the enemy is and the fact that they are evil. Second, empower those Muslims who want to defeat ISIS and who now don't trust us because of what this administration has done. So help them be the face of this war. Third, have a gargantuan counter-propaganda campaign against the ideology, just the same way we did with communism. What can you do is what's really interesting. And this is the last appendix of the book, what every American can do. Number 1, you don't have to carry a badge or a gun or wear a uniform to be on the front line of this war. Because let me tell you something, you are on the front line of this war. Everybody in this room is on the front line. Because the people in the Pulse nightclub were on the front line. The people at that council office in San Bernardino were on the front line. It's not things happening 8,000 miles away in desert conditions. It's right here, just a few miles away from this building. So, number one, educate yourself and everybody around you, whether it's your children or the person standing at the water cooler in the office. You must educate yourselves and your loved ones on the nature of the threat and how it is an existential one and how this nation must take it seriously. Use that education to hold your politicians to task. You do know that one letter to a congressional representative is calculated by their staff as equivalent to 200 phone calls. That's how they calculate it, yeah? You write what you take. They think somebody took the time to actually write a letter right in the 21st century. That counts as if 200 people called on that issue. Take your local council to task. If things are happening that you're not satisfied with, go and make your voice heard. And then lastly, and this is a thing that sometimes gets me in trouble, but I don't really care. If you think you have the mental fortitude, take responsibility for defending the Republic. If you think you can carry a gun, if you think you can get the training and the licensing to do so, then you should. Why? Because what would have happened in that club if somebody had... You don't have to kill the jihadi, but you know what? It's hard to execute a mass murder when somebody's shooting at you. You have to duck. You have to move. You're not just fish in a barrel. So if you understand that everybody's on the front line, I know this is the People's Republic. I'm sorry, I'm from Virginia. It's a little bit different in Virginia. But understand that...
But we're like a little island within the People's Republic.
This is
Waters' world. This is conservative world.
This is Don and Jen's world.
We like that.
One thing, let me give you an example, just so to illustrate this, because we are an island inside a communist dictatorship. But anyway, I played a game with my kids when they were little. We don't do it anymore because they're switched on. Whenever we went into a restaurant, it doesn't matter where it was, first thing I did, we sat down, before you look at the menu, I'd say, hey, how many entrances and exits to this restaurant? Inside the restaurant, what's the difference between a piece of furniture that could actually hide you from sight and something that would actually stop bullets? The difference between concealment, cover, right? This is a game. This is fun. When your kid's 10 years old, it's like hide and seek. You know what? That saves lives. Because if somebody comes into that room with an automatic weapon or just with a rifle or a handgun, you've got a plan. You've got a plan. So these small things can make a huge... Oh, one last thing. Sorry.
It's like playing cowboys and jihadists.
Oh, that's so politically incorrect.
I know.
Honestly, Don. Honestly. Well, who is this man? Anyway, and the last thing. Sorry. Really important. Really important. Jihadis are not crazy. They plan. They collect intelligence. They build their strategy. There is no jihadi attack in the last 15 years that was spontaneous. Guy goes to a gun store and then goes kill people. Wrong. They spend months, in the case of 9/11, years, planning and what? Surveilling. The Holy Land Foundation trial only occurred because jihadis were sloppy. They were busted filming something they wanted to blow up. And a state trooper said, why are you filming something that has no intrinsic touristic value? And that's how we found them. You may see the next jihadi surveilling his target. You know what? Tell somebody. Don't be afraid. See something, say something is actually not just some silly catchphrase of the DHS. It can save lives. All of us have a role to play.
All right. Now, this one kind of ties a lot of this together because in 2005, Der Spiegel published an article by the author Fouad Hussein. And in this book that this article is about, Hussein lays out a 7-phase timeline that sort of lines up perfectly with history since then. And I'm going to just paraphrase phase 3 through 6. And when I originally read this, and and reread it, the hair sort of stood up on the back of my neck. Let me get to this, the phases here. So the third phase describes a rising and standing up. And this is from 2007 to 2010. The focus will be Syria. There are some things that happened in Syria. Now, this was written in 2005. Between 2005, the focus will be Syria. Phase 4, 2010 to 2013, Hussein writes that Al-Qaeda will be aiming to bring about the collapse of the hated Arabic governments. What are some Arabic governments that failed in that time range we now call the Arab Spring? Mubarak, Libya, okay? Right. Now, the fifth phase, this is really scary. This will be the point. Now, keep in mind, this was written in 2005. This will be the phase in which and this is his words, the Islamic State or Caliphate can be declared between 2013 and 2016. Written in 2005, predicting it 8 years later, not even knowing President Obama would be in office or who would be leading. That was their plan. Fifth phase, this is the point at which the Islamic State or Caliphate, will be declared 2013 to 16. The sixth phase, 2016 and onward, will be a period of total confrontation. As soon as the Caliphate has been declared, the Islamic army, it will instigate the fight between the believers and the non-believers. Is that what we have happening today?
Well, look at the figures. I mean, again, it's really quite stunning. He's exactly right. When was the Caliphate declared? Caliphate was declared June 29th, 2014, 2 years ago, exactly in that time frame. So it's really hard to grasp what's going on here. But let me explain it in one way that might communicate why ISIS is so much more dangerous than Al-Qaeda. So the Caliphate was a real thing. It's not some crazy idea a guy in a cave dreamt up. The Empire of Islam existed for over 1,000 years. Established in Mecca, then headquartered in Damascus, then Baghdad. 100 years ago, it still existed. It was called the Ottoman Empire. It was dissolved by Ataturk. He did away with it after World War I. He said, no more empire, and the emperor was given a pink slip. It's like, end. We're now a republic. For 90 years, the fundamentalists have been trying to recreate the caliphate. Hundreds of organizations, starting with the Muslim Brotherhood, but going on down the list, Hizb ut-Tahrir, Egyptian Islamic Jihad, Al-Qaeda, hundreds of organizations were created with the express intent to re-establish the empire. But what happened? Every single one of them failed. They all talked about it, they all tried it, but they all failed. Until an organization called ISIS comes along, and they don't talk about it. They capture Tikrit, they capture Mosul, and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declares the caliphate reborn, with himself as the emperor. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not possible politically, rhetorically, physically to overemphasize what that means. After 90 years, one jihadi group has succeeded where all the others have failed. They have kept to this plan and they've made it a reality. And that is why it is not a JV team.